The ships appeared over Earth without warning. Massive vessels that blocked out the sun, their alien designs both beautiful and terrifying. Captain Sarah Chen watched from her base in Colorado as the world held its breath. Military communications buzzed with confusion and fear. Nobody had expected this day to come. The message came 12 hours later, broadcast simultaneously across every communication device on the planet. The voice was cold and mechanical, translated into every human language. People of Earth, you are now conscripted into the Galactic Defense Forces. Your species will serve in the war against the Kresh Empire. Compliance is mandatory. Resistance will be met with planetary sterilization. Sarah felt her blood run cold. Around her, fellow officers stared at screens showing alien text and symbols they couldn't understand. The beings who had found them weren't here as friends or explorers. They were here to draft an entire species into their war. Within days, massive transport ships landed across Earth. The aliens who emerged were tall and thin, with gray skin and large black eyes. They called themselves the Vortani, representatives of something called the Galactic Council. Their leader, Ambassador Zektar, spoke to world leaders with barely concealed disgust. Your species is primitive but numerous, Zektar explained during a broadcast from the United Nations building. You breed quickly and show some capacity for violence. These traits make you suitable for our needs. You will serve as ground troops in sectors where our more valuable species cannot be risked. Sarah translated that in her head immediately. They wanted humans to be cannon fodder, expendable soldiers to throw at their enemies while the valuable alien species stayed safe behind the lines. The thought made her hands clench into fists. The conscription began immediately. Military personnel were taken first, then civilians with combat training, then anyone who met their physical requirements. Sarah found herself loaded onto a transport ship with 300 other soldiers from various Earth nations. The ship's interior was cramped and uncomfortable, clearly designed for cargo rather than passengers. Their destination was a world called Nexus 7, a rocky planet on the front lines of the war against the Kresh Empire. During the journey, which took 3 weeks, Sarah learned more about their situation from overheard alien conversations. The Kresh were a warrior race that had been conquering systems for over 200 years. They were physically powerful, technologically advanced, and absolutely ruthless. The Galactic Council had been fighting them for decades with limited success. Why haven't you defeated them already? Sarah asked Sergeant Velkun, one of their Vortani supervisors, during a meal break. The alien's large eyes showed annoyance. The Kresh are difficult to fight. They are strong and brutal. Many council species have tried and failed. That is why we need expendable troops like humans. You will absorb their initial attacks, while our real forces prepare proper strategies. Sarah bit back her angry response. She was starting to understand the full scope of their situation. The aliens saw humans as nothing more than living shields to buy time for their real armies. The thought that her entire species had been reduced to this role filled her with a cold rage. When they arrived at Nexus 7, Sarah saw the reality of the Galactic War. The planet's surface was scarred with massive craters and the twisted remains of alien technology. In the distance, explosions lit up the horizon where battles raged continuously. The human troops were herded into a crude camp surrounded by energy barriers. Their briefing came from Major Thexani, an insectoid alien with 4 arms and compound eyes. The creature spoke in rapid, clicking tones that their translation devices struggled to interpret. Humans will advance on Kresh positions at dawn, Thexani announced. You will draw their fire while Council forces flank from the north. Expected casualties are 70 to 80%. This is acceptable. Acceptable. Sarah felt sick. Around her, she could see the same realization dawning on the faces of her fellow soldiers. They weren't here to win a war. They were here to die slowly while their alien allies watched from safety. That night, as Sarah lay on her uncomfortable cot listening to the distant sounds of battle, she made a decision. If these aliens wanted to use humans as expendable troops, they were about to learn a very important lesson about underestimating Earth's children. The next morning, As human forces prepared to advance across the blood-soaked battlefield toward entrenched creche positions, Sarah gathered the squad leaders around her. Her plan was simple but dangerous. Instead of following the aliens' suicidal frontal assault order, they would use genuine military tactics. Human tactics. "We're not charging blindly into their guns," she told them quietly. "We're going to show these creche what human warfare actually looks like." The attack began at dawn, but instead of the mindless charge the aliens expected, the human forces split into small units and began a coordinated advance using cover, suppressing fire, and tactical movement. Sarah's unit flanked wide while others provided covering fire. They moved like soldiers, not like the expendable fodder their alien commanders thought they were. The creche, expecting another wave of cannon fodder to mow down, found themselves facing a completely different kind of enemy. Humans who thought, adapted, and fought with intelligence rather than just courage. By noon, what should have been a massacre had become a tactical victory. The human forces had not only survived, but had actually pushed the creche back from positions they'd held for months. Major Thexani's compound eyes goggled in disbelief as reports came in. The expendable human troops had done the impossible. They had actually won. Sarah wiped blood and dirt from her face as she looked back at the battlefield. Around her, human soldiers tended to their wounded and secured captured creche positions. They had lost people, but far fewer than anyone had expected. More importantly, they had sent a message. Humanity was not cannon fodder. They were soldiers, and the galaxy was about to learn the difference. Word of the human victory at Nexus 7 spread through the Galactic Council forces faster than official reports. Within days, other alien commanders were requesting human troops for their own operations. But Sarah Chen and her fellow soldiers had learned something important from their first battle. The alien technology they'd been given was designed for alien physiology and alien thinking. Humans needed to adapt it to work properly. The energy rifles the Vortani had provided were clumsy, inhuman hands designed for the longer, thinner fingers of their original users. The armor was ill-fitting and restrictive. Even their communication systems assumed alien hearing ranges that didn't match human capabilities. Sarah's unit began making modifications. Staff Sergeant Miguel Rodriguez, a former mechanic from Texas, figured out how to adjust the rifle grips for human hands. The weapons became more accurate immediately. Corporal Lisa Park, who had studied engineering before her conscription, found ways to redistribute the armor's weight to better match human bone structure. Within a week, human troops were moving, faster and fighting more effectively than their alien counterparts had thought possible. But the real breakthrough came when they encountered abandoned creche technology on the battlefield. Where the Vortani saw dangerous alien devices to be avoided, humans saw puzzles to be solved. Rodriguez spent 3 days studying a damaged creche plasma cannon until he understood its basic principles. Then he did something that shocked their alien supervisors. He began improving it. "The creche design is powerful but inefficient," Rodriguez explained to Major Thexani during a supply meeting. "They waste 40% of their energy output on unnecessary heating. If we modify the focusing array and adjust the power flow, we can increase effectiveness by 30% while reducing ammunition consumption." The insectoid alien's compound eyes twitched nervously. "Humans should not tamper with creche technology. It is dangerous and beyond your understanding." Rodriguez just smiled and demonstrated his modified weapon by punching a hole through a steel plate twice as thick as the original version could penetrate. Major Thexani's mandibles clicked in what Sarah had learned was the alien equivalent of nervous swallowing. Within a month, human units were carrying a mixture of modified Galactic Council weapons, improved creche technology, and devices that were entirely human innovations. They had learned to strip useful components from both sides and combine them in ways that neither original manufacturer had considered. The results were weapons and equipment that consistently outperformed anything else on the battlefield. The aliens began to notice other differences too. Human units rarely stayed in the same positions for more than a few days. They built temporary fortifications quickly, used them effectively, then moved on before the enemy could target them properly. They scattered their forces to avoid concentrated attacks, then coordinated complex maneuvers to strike enemy weak points with overwhelming force. Most disturbing to their alien commanders, humans began questioning orders that didn't make tactical sense. When Colonel Nexavoth ordered Sarah's battalion to hold an exposed position that served no strategic purpose, she politely requested clarification of the mission objectives. When the alien commander couldn't provide a reasonable explanation, Sarah suggested an alternative approach that would accomplish the same goals with lower casualties. Humans are becoming difficult to control, Ambassador Zektar reported during a classified council session. They modify their equipment without authorization. They question orders from superior species. They develop tactics that our military advisors do not understand. Fleet Admiral Quintal, a massive creature with tentacles instead of arms, dismissed these concerns with a wave of his appendages. They are still just primitives with crude weapons. Let them think they are clever. As long as they die instead of our people, their behavior is irrelevant. But the Kresh Empire was beginning to take notice of humanity in ways the Galactic Council had not expected. Kresh military intelligence reported that human forces were consistently more dangerous than other Council species. Human units routinely achieved objectives that similar alien forces had failed to accomplish. More troubling, humans seemed to learn from each engagement, becoming more effective with every battle. War leader Thakmor studied reports from the front lines with growing concern. His people had fought the Galactic Council for decades, learning to predict and counter their strategies. But these humans fought differently. They adapted constantly, used unconventional tactics, and seemed to treat every battle as a learning experience rather than simply trying to win or die gloriously. These new council troops are dangerous, he told his war council. They do not fight like the others. They think like warriors, not like soldiers following orders. We must eliminate them before they spread their methods to other council forces. The Kresh began concentrating their attacks on human positions, hoping to destroy this new threat before it could grow stronger. But this strategy backfired in ways they hadn't anticipated. Heavy enemy attention forced human units to become even more innovative and adaptive. They developed new tactics specifically designed to counter Kresh strategies. They learned to use the aliens' own aggression against them. Sarah's promotion to major came after the Battle of Crater Ridge, where her forces had not only held against a massive Kresh assault, but had managed to capture 3 enemy commanders and a significant amount of advanced technology. The intelligence gained from interrogating these prisoners gave the Galactic Council more information about Kresh military structure than they had obtained in the previous 5 years of fighting. But with recognition came new challenges. Other alien species in the Council began requesting human advisors for their own operations. The hegemony wanted humans to train their forces in primitive but effective tactics. The collective asked for human engineers to study their weapon systems for possible improvements. The syndicate offered substantial payments for exclusive access to human military innovations. Sarah found herself sitting across from Ambassador Elena Vasquez, a former UN diplomat who had become humanity's unofficial representative to the Galactic Council. Vasquez had managed to negotiate for this meeting despite significant alien resistance. They're starting to realize what they've awakened, Vasquez said quietly, her voice barely audible over the communication jamming devices they'd learned to use. The Council brought us here as cannon fodder, but we're becoming something they didn't expect, something they can't control. Sarah nodded grimly. Around them, human troops maintained their equipment with the efficiency she'd come to expect. These weren't the same confused, frightened conscripts who had left Earth months ago. They had become something harder, smarter, and more dangerous. What do you think happens next? Sarah asked. Vasquez stared out at the battlefield where human forces were preparing for another engagement. I think the galaxy is about to learn why you don't give weapons to people you plan to treat as slaves. And I think we're going to teach them that lesson whether they want to learn it or not. In the distance, explosions lit up the night sky as human units launched another innovative assault on Kresh positions. The aliens had wanted humanity's numbers and resilience. They were getting that, but they were also getting human intelligence, creativity, and a growing understanding that they were fighting for more than just alien masters who saw them as expendable. The request came through official channels, but Sarah could hear the desperation behind the formal language. The hegemony's third fleet had been trapped in the Kepler system for 6 weeks, surrounded by Kresh forces that had proven impossible to break through. 3 different alien commanders had tried to organize relief efforts. All had failed with massive casualties. Now they wanted humans to try. Major Sarah Chen studied the tactical displays with Admiral Marcus Torres, a former U.S. Navy strategist who had been promoted rapidly through the human command structure. The situation looked impossible by conventional standards. The Kresh had positioned their forces in overlapping fields of fire, created multiple kill zones, and established supply lines that seemed unbreakable. The aliens keep trying to punch through directly, Torres observed, his weathered face creased in thought. Same strategy every time. Mass their forces and charge the strongest Kresh positions. It's like they learned one way to fight and never considered alternatives. Sarah nodded. In the months since their arrival, she had noticed this pattern repeatedly. Alien military doctrine seemed rigid and predictable. They had standard responses to standard situations, but they struggled when faced with unexpected tactics or rapid adaptation. The Kresh had learned to exploit this weakness, but they hadn't yet learned to counter human unpredictability. What, if we don't try to break through at all? Sarah asked. What if we make them come to us? The plan they developed would have been considered insane by traditional galactic military standards. Instead of attempting to punch through the Kresh blockade, human forces would establish positions throughout the outer system and begin systematically destroying Kresh supply infrastructure. They would make the siege too expensive to maintain, while simultaneously creating multiple threats that couldn't be ignored. The Galactic Council's reaction was predictably negative. Fleet Admiral Quintal's tentacles writhed in agitation as he reviewed the human proposal. This strategy is inefficient and cowardly, he declared. The proper response is a direct assault on enemy positions. Humans will advance immediately and engage the Kresh fleet in honorable combat. Torres maintained his diplomatic composure despite the insult. With respect, Admiral, honorable combat that results in total defeat doesn't help the trapped Third Fleet. Our analysis suggests that conventional assault tactics have a less than 5% chance of success. Our alternative approach has a 70% probability of forcing Kresh withdrawal within 3 weeks. Your analysis is worthless, Quintal snapped. You are primitives who have been fighting for mere months. We have centuries of military experience. You will follow established protocols. But Ambassador Elena Vasquez had been working behind the scenes, building relationships with alien species who had grown frustrated with the Council's rigid military doctrine. The hegemony, desperate to save their trapped fleet, formally requested human tactical command for the rescue operation. 3 other species added their support to this request. For the first time since humanity's conscription began, the Galactic Council found itself overruled by its own members. Humans would be allowed to conduct their unconventional strategy. The operation began with what appeared to be a withdrawal. Human forces pulled back from the Kepler system entirely, leaving only sensor drones to monitor Kresh movements. The aliens watched with satisfaction, believing that the humans had finally recognized the futility of their position. 3 days later, Kresh supply convoys throughout the sector began exploding. Human forces had scattered into dozens of small units, each operating independently with modified ships that barely registered on alien sensors. They struck supply depots, communication relays, and isolated patrol vessels. Each attack was precisely planned and quickly executed, with human forces disappearing before Kresh reinforcements could arrive. War leader Thakmor found himself facing a completely new type of warfare. His forces controlled all the major shipping, lanes, and strategic positions, but somehow the humans were strangling his supply lines anyway. They attacked targets he hadn't even considered protecting, used routes that didn't appear on any star charts, and seemed to know exactly where his forces were most vulnerable. How are they doing this? He demanded of his intelligence officers. They have no fleet assets. They have no bases in this region. Where are they operating from? The answer, when it came, was even more disturbing than the attacks themselves. The humans weren't operating from bases at all. They had converted asteroid mining equipment into mobile command centers, established temporary facilities on uninhabitable moons, and were even living aboard their modified ships for weeks at a time. They had created an entirely new form of military infrastructure that the Kresh had never encountered. Within 2 weeks, the cost of maintaining the siege became unbearable. Kresh forces were expending more resources defending their supply lines than they were gaining by holding the Third Fleet. Worse, human attacks were growing more sophisticated daily. They had begun using captured Kresh technology in ways its original designers had never imagined. The breakthrough came when human forces managed to capture a Kresh communication hub intact. The intelligence gathered from this facility revealed the locations of every enemy position in the system, their supply schedules, and even their planned responses to various tactical situations. Sarah coordinated the final phase of the operation from a converted asteroid mining station that had been transformed into a military command center. Around her, human officers managed dozens of simultaneous operations with an efficiency that would have impressed their former alien supervisors. They had learned to fight the kind of war that suited human strengths, rather than trying to match alien expectations. Kresh forces are beginning withdrawal from the inner system, reported Lieutenant Commander Park, who had become one of their most skilled intelligence analysts. They're abandoning secondary positions and consolidating around their primary base. Signal all units, Sarah ordered. Begin final phase. Let's give the Third Fleet a clear path home. The assault that freed the hegemony's trapped fleet lasted only 6 hours. Kresh forces, already weakened by weeks of supply disruption and harassment, found themselves facing coordinated attacks from directions they had thought impossible. Human forces struck with overwhelming force at precisely chosen moments, then disappeared before effective retaliation could be organized. When the dust settled, the Third Fleet was free, the Kresh blockade was destroyed, and human casualties totaled less than 3%. The aliens had lost more people in single conventional assaults than humans had lost in an entire campaign. The aftermath sent shockwaves through both the Galactic Council and the Kresh Empire. For the first time in decades of warfare, Council forces had achieved a decisive victory against a major Kresh operation. More disturbing for both sides, they had done it using tactics that neither understood nor could easily counter. Ambassador Zektar found himself facing increasingly uncomfortable questions from other council members. The syndicate wanted to know why they hadn't been informed of these new human capabilities. The collective demanded access to human tactical innovations for their own forces. The hegemony formally requested human command staff for all future operations in their sector. The humans are becoming too independent, Zektar reported during an emergency council session. They no longer follow our directives without question. They develop their own strategies and recruit allies among our member species. If this continues, they will become a threat to council authority. But Fleet Admiral Quintal was studying casualty reports that made uncomfortable reading. In every engagement where humans had used their own tactics, council losses had been dramatically lower than previous operations. More importantly, they were actually winning battles that had seemed hopeless under traditional command. Perhaps, he said slowly, his tentacles coiling thoughtfully, we should consider adapting our own methods to incorporate human innovations. The suggestion sent ripples of unease through the council chamber. They had brought humans into the war as expendable troops to absorb enemy fire, while real soldiers did the important fighting. Now they were discussing learning from these primitives and adopting their methods. Meanwhile, in the human command centers scattered throughout council space, Sarah Chen and her fellow officers were planning their next operations with growing confidence. They had proven that human military thinking could defeat enemies that had stymied the galaxy's greatest powers for generations. The question was no longer whether humans could fight effectively in galactic warfare. The question was what they planned to do with that knowledge. The message reached Earth 6 months after the liberation of the hegemony's Third Fleet. It was broadcast on all frequencies, transmitted through every communication network, and delivered with a formality that had never been used for humanity before. The Galactic Council formally requests the presence of human military leadership at the Strategic Planning Conference on Nexus Prime. Your tactical innovations have proven essential to our war effort. Your participation in future strategy development is required. Required. Not commanded or demanded, but requested and required. Ambassador Elena Vasquez smiled grimly as she reviewed the invitation. The language was carefully chosen to avoid, admitting that the Council needed human help. But the meaning was clear enough. The aliens who had conscripted humanity as cannon fodder were now begging for their expertise. But Sarah Chen, now holding the rank of general in what had become known as the Human Defense Corps, was more interested in what the message didn't say. There was no mention of human forces returning to their original role as expendable troops. No reference to Council authority over human military decisions. Most importantly, no suggestion that humans would continue accepting orders without question. There, scared, Admiral Torres observed as he studied intelligence reports from across the galaxy. The Kresh have adapted to traditional Council tactics, but they can't figure out how to counter human strategies. Every engagement we command results in victory. Every time they try to use their old methods, they lose. The numbers supported his assessment. In the 8 months since humans had begun developing their own tactical doctrines, Council forces had achieved more strategic victories than in the previous 5 years combined. More importantly, casualty rates had dropped by 60% for operations under human command, while enemy losses had increased dramatically. But success had created new problems. The various alien species within the Galactic Council were beginning to compete for human support rather than cooperating as they had for centuries. The hegemony offered exclusive trade agreements in exchange for human military advisors. The collective promised advanced technology transfers for tactical training. The syndicate simply offered massive payments for human services. General Chen found herself in the unprecedented position of representing not just Earth's interests, but humanity's role in galactic politics. The conference on Nexus Prime would determine whether humans remained junior partners in the Council's war effort, or whether they would become something entirely different. The Council chambers on Nexus Prime had been designed to impress and intimidate. Massive towers of crystal and metal stretched toward an artificial sky, while holographic displays showed the current state of the galactic war. Representatives from 17 different species occupied seats arranged in strict hierarchical order, with the most powerful civilizations closest to the central podium. Humans had been assigned seats in the back, in an area traditionally reserved for newly contacted species and tribute populations. Sarah walked past those seats without stopping and took her place at the primary strategic table, directly across from Fleet Admiral Quintal. The alien's tentacles writhed in obvious agitation. General Chen, your assigned seating is in the observation area. These seats are reserved for species with full Council membership. Sarah met his gaze calmly. Admiral, I'm here because you requested human participation in strategic planning. I assumed that meant actual participation, not observation from the cheap seats. If you prefer that humans simply watch while you develop strategies we'll have to fix later, we can certainly arrange that. The subtle threat was unmistakable. Around the chamber, alien representatives shifted uncomfortably. They needed human tactical expertise, but accepting human presence at the primary table meant acknowledging them as equals rather than subordinates. Ambassador Zektar attempted to resolve the situation diplomatically. Perhaps we could create a special advisory position that would allow human input without disrupting established protocols. No, Sarah said simply. We're not advisors anymore. We're not expendable troops or hired consultants. We're partners in this war, or we're not participating at all. The statement sent shockwaves through the chamber. Several alien representatives began speaking simultaneously in their various languages, while translation systems struggled to keep up with the overlapping conversations. Finally, Syndicate Representative Mordek called for order. The human position is clear, Mordek announced. They demand full partnership status or they will withdraw from the war effort. We must decide whether we can accept this requirement. Fleet Admiral Quintal's response was immediate. This is unacceptable. Humans are a primitive species that we elevated from their own planet less than 1 year ago. They cannot be granted equal status with civilizations that have existed for millennia. Then you can lose this war without us, Admiral Torres interjected from his position beside Sarah. Because our analysis suggests that Council forces cannot defeat the Kresh Empire using traditional tactics. You need human innovations, human strategies, and human leadership. The question is whether your pride is worth more than victory. The debate that followed lasted for 6 hours and revealed the deep fractures that had developed within the Galactic Council. Younger species, those who had joined the Council more recently, generally supported human partnership. They had benefited most from human tactical innovations and had less invested in maintaining traditional hierarchies. Older species, particularly those in leadership positions, resisted any change that would diminish their authority. They had built their power on the assumption that age and experience translated into wisdom and capability. Admitting that humans, the newest and most primitive council species, had revolutionized galactic warfare, challenged the foundation of their political system. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. War leader Thakmor himself, broadcasting from a captured council communication station, addressed the conference directly. Council weaklings, his translated voice echoed through the chamber. You debate while your human pets win battles that your greatest warriors could not. The Kresh Empire offers terms of surrender to the human forces. They have proven themselves worthy opponents. The rest of you remain beneath our notice. The silence that followed this transmission was deafening. The Kresh Empire, which had never offered terms to any council species, was now attempting to negotiate directly with humanity. The implications were staggering. Sarah stood slowly, feeling the weight of galactic history shifting around her. The Kresh offer is interesting but irrelevant. Humanity didn't come to this war by choice, and we won't abandon our allies now. However, our continued participation requires recognition of what we've become. She gestured to the holographic displays showing current battle positions. Human forces now command 40% of all Council military operations. Human innovations have been adopted by every member species. Human strategies have delivered more victories in the past year than the Council achieved in the previous decade. We're not asking for partnership. We're stating the reality that already exists. The vote, when it finally came, was closer than anyone had expected. 8 species supported immediate human partnership. 7 opposed it. 2 abstained. The tie-breaking vote came from the hegemony, whose representative stood and addressed the chamber with obvious emotion. The humans saved our third fleet when everyone else said it was impossible. They've saved thousands of our soldiers' lives with their tactics and leadership. If full partnership is the price of their continued service, then we will pay it gladly. The transformation of humanity's status from conscripted cannon fodder to full council partners took effect immediately. But Sarah knew that this political victory was only the beginning. The real challenge would be using their new authority to win a war that had already lasted too long and claimed too many lives. As the conference concluded and alien representatives filed out of the chamber, Admiral Torres joined Sarah at the strategic display. Think they'll actually honor this agreement? He asked. Sarah studied the tactical information flowing across the screens. Human forces were already preparing for their next major offensive, one that would determine whether the war could be ended quickly or whether it would drag on for years. They'll honor it as long as we keep winning, she replied. The moment we fail, they'll try to put us back in our assigned place. That means we can't afford to fail. Around them, the machinery of galactic warfare continued its endless operation. But for the first time since humanity's forced conscription began, they were operating as equals rather than expendables. The galaxy was about to discover what humans could accomplish when they fought for themselves rather than for masters who saw them as disposable. The final battle began not with the massive fleet engagements that had characterized the war for decades, but with a simple message broadcast across the galaxy. General Sarah Chen stood before communication arrays that reached every inhabited system, every military installation, and every civilian population center. This is General Chen of the Human Defense Corps, speaking for the combined forces of the Galactic Council. She began. We offer the Kresh Empire one final opportunity for honorable surrender. Your military forces are surrounded, Your supply lines are cut, and your home systems are under siege. Surrender now, and your people will be treated with dignity and respect. Continue fighting, and we will demonstrate why the galaxy has learned to fear human determination. The response came 12 hours later from Kresh Prime itself, broadcast with the same galactic reach. War leader Thakmor appeared on screens across known space, his massive form imposing even through holographic projection. The Kresh Empire does not surrender to anyone, especially not to primitive mammals who learned to use weapons less than 1 year ago. We will fight until every human is dead, and their pathetic allies remember their proper place in the galactic order. Sarah had expected this response. In the months since achieving partnership status within the Council, human intelligence networks had provided detailed information about Kresh society and psychology. They were a warrior culture that viewed surrender as a fate worse than death. The war could only end with their complete defeat. But the conflict that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. Instead of the prolonged sieges and massive battles that had defined previous campaigns, human forces implemented what Admiral Torres called cascade strategy. They would strike multiple targets simultaneously, force the enemy to respond in predictable ways, then exploit the weaknesses those responses created. The Kresh found themselves fighting a war they couldn't understand. Their fleets would move to defend critical systems, only to discover that human forces had already captured their true objectives elsewhere. Their supply convoys would be destroyed by enemies who somehow knew their exact routes and schedules. Their communications would be intercepted and analyzed faster than they could change their encryption methods. Most disturbing of all, human tactics seemed to improve with every engagement. Where other species developed strategies and used them repeatedly until the enemy learned to counter them, humans adapted constantly. They would use a successful tactic exactly once, then develop 3 variations to use against enemies who had prepared defenses for the original approach. Within 6 months, the Kresh Empire had lost more territory than in the previous 20 years of warfare. Their legendary military discipline began to crack as defeat followed defeat. Reports reached Council intelligence of Kresh commanders executing their own officers for suggesting retreat from obviously hopeless positions. But the war's end came not from human military victory, but from an unexpected political development. Ambassador Elena Vasquez had spent the months since the strategic conference building relationships, not just with Council species, but with conquered populations throughout Kresh territory. Humanity's reputation for treating prisoners with dignity and protecting civilian populations had spread throughout the galaxy. The rebellion began on Kresh-occupied worlds that had been under alien domination for generations. Populations that had given up hope of freedom suddenly saw an opportunity in humanity's military successes. Resistance movements that had been crushed repeatedly found new courage in stories of human tactical innovations and battlefield victories. War leader Thakmor found himself facing not just external enemies, but internal revolt on a scale that Kresh military doctrine had never anticipated. His forces, stretched thin by human attacks, could not simultaneously fight the Council and suppress dozens of planetary rebellions. The final assault on Kresh Prime itself lasted only 3 days. Human forces, supported by ships from every Council species and aided by intelligence provided by Kresh rebels, overwhelmed defenses that had been considered impregnable for centuries. But even in defeat, war leader Thakmor refused to surrender. General Chen found him in the ruins of his command center, wounded but still defiant. Around them, the sounds of fighting had finally stopped as the last Kresh resistance was eliminated. "You have won," Thakmor admitted, his voice filled with bitter admiration. "Your species fights with honor. Despite what we were told about human weakness, we underestimated you just as the Council underestimated you. Perhaps this was inevitable." Sarah looked at the alien warrior who had commanded her respect even as an enemy. "Your people fought bravely. They'll be treated with honor as prisoners of war, and they'll have a place in the galaxy when this is over. But there are conditions." The peace negotiations that followed established not just the end of the war, but a completely new structure for galactic civilization. The old galactic Council, with its rigid hierarchies and species-based power distribution, was dissolved. In its place, humanity proposed the Galactic Union, with representation based on contribution rather than age or traditional authority. Fleet Admiral Quintal and Ambassador Zektar found themselves in the uncomfortable position of negotiating, with humans as equals, while species that had been their subordinates for centuries suddenly had equal voices in galactic government. The adjustment was difficult for civilizations that had grown comfortable with their established positions. This new structure threatens the stability that has maintained peace for millennia, Quintal argued during one heated negotiating session. Humans have been spacefaring for less than 1 year. They cannot understand the complexities of galactic governance. Sarah's response was measured but firm. Admiral, the stability you're referring to led to a war that lasted decades and cost millions of lives. It created a rigid system that couldn't adapt to new threats and couldn't find innovative solutions to old problems. Humanity didn't ask to be dragged into your war. But since we've demonstrated that new perspectives can achieve what established methods could not. The breakthrough came when several former Kresh worlds petitioned to join the new union, under human protection rather than returning to council control. These populations had experienced both Kresh occupation and council governance, and they preferred the human approach to both. Their testimony about human treatment of prisoners and protection of civilians provided compelling evidence for humanity's fitness for leadership. The final agreement established Earth as the new galactic capital, with humanity holding a permanent seat on the Union Council alongside representatives from all member species. More importantly, it enshrined principles of adaptability, innovation, and individual dignity that had been largely absent from previous galactic government. Admiral Torres, now serving as humanity's first galactic defense coordinator, stood with Sarah on the observation deck of the new Union headquarters orbiting Earth. Below them, their home planet continued its rotation, looking peaceful and unchanged despite everything that had happened. "Think it will work?" Torres asked, watching as ships from dozens of different species moved through Earth's orbital traffic patterns. Sarah considered the question carefully. In the year since humanity's forced conscription had begun, they had transformed from cannon, fodder to galactic leaders. The journey had cost lives, changed civilizations, and completely restructured the political balance of known space. "The species that brought us here as expendable troops are now taking orders from human commanders," she observed. "Former enemies are requesting our protection. Populations that had given up hope are rebuilding their worlds under Union principles. I'd say it's working better than anyone expected." A communication alert interrupted their conversation. The message was from the Outer Rim territories, where human-led exploration fleets were making contact with species that had remained isolated during the war. The galaxy was larger than any of them had realized, and humanity's reputation was opening diplomatic possibilities that had been impossible under the old council system. Elena Vasquez joined them at the observation window, carrying reports from the morning's Union Council session. "The hegemony wants to establish joint research projects with human scientists. The collective is requesting human advisors for their educational systems. Even some former Kresh officers are asking to join Union forces under human command." Sarah smiled as she watched Earth turn slowly below them. 18 months ago, she had been a military officer on a single world, preparing for conflicts that seemed important at the time, but had proven trivial compared to galactic warfare. Now she was helping to govern a civilization that spanned star systems and included dozens of intelligent species. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. The Galactic Council had conscripted humanity because they believed humans were numerous, disposable, and useful only as cannon fodder. They had been right about human numbers and wrong about everything else. Humans were adaptable rather than disposable, innovative rather than predictable, and capable of leadership rather than just following orders. "The galaxy dragged us into their war," Sarah said quietly, "and now they're living with the consequences. I wonder if they're satisfied with the trade."